Empowerment channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericaempowerment.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Welcome to Getting Common with Professor Carliss Chatman. Getting Common covers a variety of topics and features guests from business, law, politics, government, education, and some of the most insightful entrepreneurs. It's a refreshing, common sense approach to some of the most important discussion points today. Now, here is your host, Carliss Chatman.
Good morning, everyone. I am Carliss Chatman, your host of Getting Common. In my day job, I'm an associate professor of law at Washington and Lee University. This week, we are discussing debt and income inequality with two experts on the topic, Professors Wherry and Fenaba Addo. I'll start by having them introduce themselves further. First, Fred.
I am Fred Wherry. In my day job, I'm the Townsend Martin class of 1917 professor of sociology here at Princeton and an affiliated faculty member in African American Studies. And I also direct the Dignity and Debt Network, which is a partnership between Princeton and the Social Science Research Council.
All right, Fenaba.
Hi, I'm Fenaba Addo. I'm an associate professor of public policy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I'm also adjunct faculty with sociology and a faculty fellow with the Carolina Population Center. Great to be here.
Awesome. And I should say Fenaba is a fellow Blue Devil who just happens to be working in the belly of the beast at UNC. But I think
down the road.
Down the road, you know, she's surviving. She's surviving. Yes. All right. Now, Fenaba, your work has focused on the strain that being low income and needing debt to finance life advancements has had on family relationships. What difference does it make in a family when people start out their careers with a debt load?
Yeah, so I think, one way that we kind of start to think about this topic and think about this area is, are people able to make the decisions, or they have like full, to kind of realize their wants, their dreams, their hopes in a way that, at a time that is most suitable for themselves. So what we kind of see when we look at the studies and the research that I've done is that tends to kind of delay transitioning. I've done work on family formation and relationships, kind of showing that, especially for women, we're going to get into student debt, but student debt has been associated with delays into transitioning into partnered relationships such as cohabitation and marriage, much more likely to stay single. We also see that, if you take on, if you have a heavy debt burden, which is usually kind of defined as debt to income or debt to assets, those, and you struggle to pay it back, those have high costs, both in the short and long term for many families. So associated with higher costs of borrowing very early, if you want to purchase things later on, such as home ownership or long-term assets that are associated with wealth accumulation, can be even hard to kind of access, or if you're trying to access those things, it can be very costly to a large extent. So I'll stop there. We can go into to more of that, but that's kind of how we start to think about some of these costs associated with accumulating debt when you don't have a lot of economic resources.
All right, now, Fred, what I found compelling about your work, particularly with the Dignity and Debt Network, is that it tries to remove the stigma of debt. And in my opinion, to highlight the difference between how the wealthy use debt and how the poor use debt. What are those differences, and what has Dignity and Debt done to remedy those differences?
So I guess the first thing to say is that debt is not always a bad thing. And it is not sort of something that's so inherently bad, but something that we make bad for some folks. And so middle and upper middle income people usually use debt to invest in the future. They buy a house that's appreciating in value because the neighborhoods that they buy those houses in are appropriately appraised. They invest in an education from a place with a decent return on investment. And that said, it is also true that low-income consumers are more likely to go into debt just to meet ongoing basic needs like groceries and gas than our middle and upper middle income consumers. And so low-income consumers are also likely to go into debt when faced with emergencies in their own family or in their extended family network. And the solution that gets held out to them is simply debt. The advertisers are targeting and marketing very heavily to these folks. They are more likely, if you're lower income, to get a whole lot more offers for credit products that have a higher initiation fee, that have a higher interest rate, that have harsher penalties, that have higher overdraft fees than are your middle and higher income consumers. And so part of what's happening is that you are, even if you're telling yourself, we're not going to get into more debt, these envelopes arrive in the mail that tell you that you are pre-qualified. And it tells you sort of there's a large amount of money that you're pre-qualified for. Your family, your kids see these envelopes, they're sitting on the table. And when emergencies come up, they say, what do you mean you can't help contribute more money to that funeral? What do you mean you can't do more for the family? Because you apparently are good for it. And so part of what we need to sort of get really serious about is that people don't just make the decision about when to go into debt on their own. These are family and extended family decisions, and these are decisions that are being really pushed by marketers. And the last thing I'll say on this is that one of the things that we've tried to be really conscious about is that respect, disrespect, being able to keep your head held up high has a lot to do with the kinds of products and services people seek. Sometimes people are paying more money just so that they aren't sort of disrespected when they go in to get that loan, and they know they're paying more money. And so telling someone, you're paying too much for that loan, you should try these other places, and they can tell you back, well, I've tried some of those other places and they treated me in a way that you don't treat an adult. And so I'm going to go to a tried and true place, and it's not as bad as some of the other places that are out there. So basically leave me alone. And so we have to get really, become a bit more realistic about the way people are treated when they're handling their finances. And how you can really be disincentivized by disrespect and paralyzed by shame.
You know, something
That's
I
so
see that,
important.
yeah, totally. And I was going to say something I see as a parallel between, what you both opened with are the ideas of what people are expected to do. And the idea that when people get into debt, and even when it comes to student loans sometimes, but especially when they get into debt for necessities, we perceive it sort of culturally as it being their fault, right? We have this negative stigma. And so it's expected that they are not treated with respect when they go get those products. How does that stigma impact lending? And how does that stigma impact people's ability to use debt to climb out of poverty? And either of you could answer.
I can start. I guess, one thing I think about is a lot, especially in thinking about the student debt context, is that when we individualize an issue and we make it the problem of the individual or individual decision making, then it makes it harder, or we don't seek policy-based or structural solutions, right? So we say, you got into this mess, this is your fault, or poor decision making. And then we also look for individual solutions, right? So education-based solutions that are not serving to fix or correct or address many of the pathways that led them to that particular situation, and what we like to believe and what we see is not necessarily associated at all with financial literacy or issues of financial education. So I think that's my initial I respond to what I think about a lot when people start to feel bad about that, or the mechanisms that make people feel bad about taking on debt is that we really try to individualize this very structural problem. I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges too is part of the reason I think we do the individualization and sort of talk about, if you just work hard enough and fight hard enough, is that when you do overcome and you have that triumphant story, you're really proud of it. And the whole community sort of rallies around, we finally got some good news. And so I was born in the very early 70s. And I remember that before I entered kindergarten, we moved from like this not very nice house to a ranch home that my parents built. And I remember when they were doing this, my dad did not trust the banks. And his distrust of the banks wasn't sort of some kind of, oh, he's old fashioned. He had a whole line, a roster of names of people who had gone and gotten a mortgage. And as soon as there was a disruption in work because they were on strike or something else was going on, they took everything and they would be near the end of paying, or they signed on to these deals where they thought they were doing a rent to own. There are all these deals that people were signing on to that were just tearing them apart. And so somehow he and my mom, because the person who owned this land, they sold this, it was a Black woman, she said, she sold it to them well under price. Otherwise, they couldn't have gotten the land, and all these other things that came together in ways that otherwise we couldn't have done it. But I remember sort of in that moment being sort of made really aware that there are all these practices and policies out there that were getting in the way. And although we triumphed because a lot of things that typically don't happen, like you get land well underpriced, and you've got one of the better unionized jobs in the area so that you have all these savings and you're willing to let your family live very poorly until you're able to move. I mean, there are all these things that came together that typically don't come together. And so, but the thing that does, of course, is it allows us to say, oh, if you just did what Mr. Charlie did, you'll make it. And there are all these moments along the way where Mr. Charlie, but for some call it luck and others call it grace, would not have made it. There are lots of ways Mr. Charlie would not have made it, and we had other relatives and people who had the same moral fortitude as Mr. Charlie, and they didn't make it. And so I think we have to get past these hero narratives in order to say there are policies and practices out there, there are marketing practices, there are appraisal practices that just make it much harder, particularly for families of color.
Your story is interesting to me because I remember my own grandparents saying, don't ever get a mortgage. Like, if you can't buy a house in cash, don't get it. And it's like, well, that's impossible, right? Like, how could you buy a house in cash? But for them, they have these horror stories, and that's what they take. And so they think, buy the land, build the house, wait forever, take do it all in cash, because they couldn't trust the bank. There's a generation, it hasn't been long, when we literally could not trust the bank. But I think what is also interesting is how, because of that historical distrust of banks and lending, there's then shame in not being able to have the luck and the grace to be the one who can save and get the money. Now, one thing I remember when I was growing up is there was certain debt that was good debt, and that good debt was student loan debt. And any other debt other than if you did get a mortgage was bad debt and shameful. And the perception when I was growing up was, go to whatever school you can get into. Doesn't matter if it's for-profit, nonprofit, any kind of education you can get, it's worth the investment. Has that been the reality? And I'll say, as another follow-up, if that isn't the reality, what makes the student loan crisis so unique for people of color?
Whew.
Well,
start, Fred?
I'm happy to. So I guess we should let a few things sink in first. But so I think one of the things people don't pay attention to is that there are a lot of folks 12 years after leaving college if you're a Black borrower and you went into debt for your schooling, 66% of those borrowers owe more money 12 years after they've been paying for 12 years. They owe more money in 12 years than when they left college. And that's not the case for others. And so, it's less than half of that for whites. So 30% of white borrowers owe more after 12 years, 36% of Latinx, 21% of Asian borrowers. And thankfully, we have Fenaba here, who's done all this work. She and Jason Houle, she can tell you that even when you graduate, you're underemployed with your college degree. And so we have to start there, I think, in order to be also realistic about sort of people starting college and not finishing. So 6 years after starting, 60% of white students graduate, Asian students graduate, but only 54% of Latinx and 38% of Black students graduate in that same time period. And so this thing that looked like the great promise, and we sort of went in to the great promise, and it's supposed to be mobility. Yes, it's better to have a college degree than not for mobility, but you're not getting the same payoff that others are getting. And if you don't finish, which is sadly, a lot of folks don't actually get the degree, then you've got debt and no degree. And so this is one of the things that I think is just one of the great tragedies of public policy. But Fenaba, this is your wheelhouse.
No, you raised many of the important points that we speak to often when we're discussing this. Is one, the uniqueness of Black borrowers in this discussion. So, if we look at the numbers on aggregate, they tend to reflect kind of what we hear often in common parlance around, going to college, having to take on debt, and then paying it off, under the standard plan, maybe in 10, 20 years, depending on your income and, how you're faring. But when we start to kind of disaggregate the data, looking into especially, particular groups and especially Black borrowers, when we control for, we adjust for, account for, I'm trying not to use too much jargon, but take into account all these kind of factors related to institution, like Brad said, what institution you went to, whether or not you finished, whether or not, you, I don't know, even like family structure or financial literacy, like independent of all of that, Black borrowers still have accumulated so much more debt and are struggling with repayment, with default and delinquency. So I think the narrative around good debt is tied to, yes, a lot of empirical studies that have shown over the last, few decades that, taking on debt and going to college, and when we think about going to college, it's kind of investing in yourself. You're removing yourself from the labor market in hopes that you're acquiring the skills, human capital, or for whatever, whatever you need, so that when you return to the labor market, your returns, your salary, your income will be so much greater and will be able to actually pay off that debt. That in theory is what is suggestive of this process. In practice, we see that this actually has not materialized for many, and unfortunately many Black millennials and generations who have come after them. A lot of the work that we've done have tied it to larger, wealth inequality that exists within our society. But also there's a lot of, when we discussed earlier, we were discussing like credit markets, predation on families and students in this space with regard to the types of loans that they've had to take on, and labor market discriminations that has been ongoing and persistent, and struggles with even if you have the degree, when you transition out of college, struggling to pay down that debt initially, and it compounding over time, and the repayment systems and programs that are in place that just haven't been amenable to people's many different situations, and we are overrepresented in those areas as well. One thing I'll add, Fred, laid out a lot of the statistics, is that when we see the programs such as the repayment plans, income repayment, and PSLF, Black borrowers are overrepresented in these programs, which is, I think, is a signal that they're struggling, right? You've done all the right things, but are yet still can't pay off this debt. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that has been happening and ongoing, and really is reflective of a system that, is
broken.
Is broken. Yeah, I hesitate to say broken, but broken. Yes, we're working the way it should, or that it was designed.
Maybe. Well, and I hate to talk about the math because I am a law professor and we don't like to do math over there. But I think people do not understand how you can owe more 10 or 12 years later than when you started. So would one of you like to break down the math of that? Like, how is it possible if you are on the proposed plan that you get when you graduate that says you should be able to pay this off in 20 years? How do you end up 10 or 12 years out owing more than when you started? Do you want to do the math, Fenaba?
Oh boy, nice testing me. So the problem is called like negative amortization. I guess that came out of my mouth correctly. But interest on loans. So if you defer or you are paying minimum payments, it is possible over time that the interest on those loans is growing at a greater extent than you're able to pay down the principal. So there are a lot of people who have gotten kind of stuck in this position where they have just been paying the interest and not necessarily paying down the principal, and it's ballooned to an extent that you can actually owe more than you originally took out for the loan. There are lots of different, I guess, processes or ways that people who have tried to mitigate when they are struggling with paying back loans. And it's really like, because you don't go into default, you put like $1 or something, something down on it, but just by putting a little bit down doesn't make the debt go away. It just extends the period. And in that process, especially, with regard with loans that don't have like federal protected loans, such as private loans, in particular, they continue to accrue a lot of interest over time. So hopefully that was good.
No, that was exactly what I was thinking.
But hopefully I did a good job. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I try to tell my students is what I was told when I was in law school. Mm-hmm. If you can pay on some of the principal, if you have private loans from undergrad, pay on some of the principal of that with any of your extra money if you have it. And it was because of this compounding interest in negative amortization and all these things that I ignored when I took classes in undergrad on economics and statistics and all of that, that then have an impact on your life later on. And I think it's, people don't understand what happens if there is a family emergency and you call and request a forbearance. They don't understand that the interest is accruing and interest is compounding, and it just balloons and grows and grows and grows. And as Fred opened with, we have a disproportionate amount of family emergency and needing to borrow to survive. And so if you're that one family member who got out and you're helping other family members, so you're skipping your loan payments to help other family members, your student loan debt is also multiplying on the side.
Yeah, but the other thing too, on this, I just want to add that a lot of people don't fully understand that, it's, even though our parents and everybody wants to help you, but they help you in the way that they can. And typically, in some communities of color, a lot of money goes from the child to the parents as soon as you're able. And so even if you're making your payments, you're not going to make those payments at as fast as a higher rate, because you're trying to keep some cushion because you're expecting that somebody from the family is going to be in need in some way. And so on the one hand, there's the, whenever you get extra money, put it towards that principle, but that's harder to do when you've got you're in a society with a broken social safety net. So you are the safety net. And so you are sort of providing those safety nets function, but you don't get a tax break for providing safety net functions. You're just providing them. And so I just want to, make sure that I fully acknowledge and make sure that people can better see that it's not just someone not making the determination of putting enough down. It's how much else that's unofficial that's being called on them to sort of send out of the household.
Yeah, and I'll give a plug for Dorothy's book, Dorothy Brown's book, Whiteness of Wealth, which explores the tax implications and how the tax code also feeds into this system. As Fred said, you cannot take a deduction for helping your aunt or your uncle or your cousin or even your parents. The deductions are only for traditional nuclear families. And so if you have a non-traditional family where you're helping everyone, in addition to being taxed at a higher rate because you're single, you also are not getting any benefits for paying that medical bill for the cousin or helping out with that funeral from the tax code. So it compounds in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Now, Fred, you had a great segue for me, because what I wanted to talk about next is, we were told that education was our way for social mobility, and it hasn't been the reality. So I would love for you to talk about how this attempt to achieve upward mobility has worked out over the last couple of generations.
Oof. So, I think there are two things to keep in mind. The first one is that we've done much better on income than we have done on wealth. And so whenever you see people saying, African Americans are doing fine, income-wise, we're doing much better than we were doing. Wealth-wise, no. And so whenever people also push back against any suggestions that some debt should be canceled, and they're saying, rich people are going to benefit, the rich people they're talking about are those who just got, they just finally got a job with decent income. They have no wealth. And those are the ones, and they typically are people of color. Those are the ones that the pundits are saying they're people with higher incomes who are going to benefit. And so it's a wealth story. I think the other thing is sometimes it has worked out if you've managed to go to a wealthy school, and so. We look at schools, we say, they all have this really high price tag, and they're, especially the privates, they're super expensive. And then you have to, what we're not asking ourselves is, well, how wealthy is that school? And, to what extent are students finishing without debt or with low debt? And there you get a lot more variation. And so you have very expensive schools. And sometimes the more expensive the school is, the more likely it is you're not going to pay anything. So, so Princeton, and this is not to say that Princeton does everything well, but Princeton was the first to say that low and moderate income families should not become indebted for a good education. And so 80% of our students who graduate are debt-free. And 30%, and that's compared to 30% of students who are going to colleges across the country. And that's a wealth story. That's both a wealth story and a leadership decides to sort of put that wealth to good use. And it's also sort of a story of deciding that young people should not start their adulthoods in deficit if we can help it. And what would that mean for us as a society is if we're not starting our lives in deficit. And so I think, so part of me thinks that, there was a promise of mobility. And we got some mobility in terms of income. We didn't get so much in terms of wealth, but that's something that we can work on if we decide that we're going to get serious about the policies and practices that got us here.
Now, what does it take to build the wealth and to bridge that wealth gap? Because it's clearly not just the income.
Yeah. But this is where I'm always looking to my my economic colleague, because I know she knows how to build it, and she also knows what takes it away. Fenaba.
Oh, wow. I mean, policy-wise, it's going to take a lot, if we're talking about especially the racial wealth gap. There are, we could think about, I think, addressing the exploitation and the historical legacies of discrimination and theft that have happened over, you want to go back, starting with, slavery and post-slavery and Jim Crow and everything to redlining and current day, housing and credit market discrimination. And that really starts to make the case for reparations for African Americans. And then there's also other promising policy proposals on the table that people have discussed, such as opportunity accounts or baby bonds, kinds of measures that would ensure children with a trust account. And this is really like, thinking bold and innovative. I say bold and innovative, but among scholars of inequality, this is what it would take, because the disparities are just so large and so intractable, I would say. And to believe that people can save their way to closing these gaps is just not going to happen in the sense. I can even pull on like a more current example. I mean, Fred has raised often quite a bit the differences in appraisals of homes, but we saw recent reports of what happened during COVID when a lot of people were refinancing their homes, and we see that African American households were denied the ability to refinance their homes or their mortgages, especially I believe Wells Fargo denied disproportionately a lot of Black homeowners, right? So, attempts to kind of, better, individually fix your wealth standing is still, we can still pick up evidence of discriminatory practices or, disproportionate access to the same products that are wealth building for white Americans. And it's just going to be hard to get there without policy initiative or and a very proactive policy that is non-race neutral in my opinion. In my opinion.
Yeah. And what I love your opinion. Like that's one reason, I have you here. Because, what I find interesting, as a lawyer and someone who deals in policy, the easiest way to be race neutral is to focus on income and focus on personal responsibility and, maybe even make changes to the banking rules or make affirmative changes so that Wells Fargo pays yet another huge fine. Or so that, we work to unionize and do things to get that individual income up. But the individual income is not enough. And sending people to, financial literacy programs is not going to make up for the fact that there's more a month at the end of the money, right? There's nothing you can do about that. And financial literacy is not going to fix that at all.
It's helpful, but it's I will say that it's helpful, especially for those for whom have been able to secure some financial footing and some security, right? How to build upon that or to try to maintain some stability. But really, it's really hard to manage zero resources, I guess, or to you have to have some resources in order to kind of make those discussions. And I will say, a lot of wealthy people rely on financial planners in order to build their wealth. They're not, sitting at home, educating themselves. They rely on experts to do this work. So.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much that happened, Fenaba, until when you join the faculty and then they say, there's this wealth advisor you have access to in a lot of places, like a wealth advisor, and you go in and they run all these numbers for you and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, you're not supposed to, don't worry. And even things that I should have checked ahead of time, they just tell you, oh no, we're here to make sure that things work and we're going to automate some stuff. And they're there to make your life easier. And that was such a different experience of getting advice than what I know that other people have experienced who are lower on the income scale, who go in and they're just being told everything they've done wrong. And you just need to cut out all the fun stuff and don't buy that expensive coffee. And you're like, the coffee didn't do it. Coffee didn't do it. And so it's such even a different sort of transactional environment when you are considered someone who needs to be taken care of and looked after and given expert advice versus someone who needs to be disciplined and reprimanded for sort of somehow not doing something really heroic and nearly impossible. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no, it's a different world. And it's, the first time I worked at a big law firm, all I could think was, would it have been nice if my parents had this information that now is just free to me in a conference room whenever I need it, or that's on a 1-800 number. If their income combined is the same as my single income, they could have been managing their combined income in the way that I was managing mine. And we could have had better outcomes, but they just don't have access to the information. The other thing people don't have access to the information about, Fred made a comment about wealthy schools. And when it comes to student loans, not all student loans are equal and not all schools are equal. And we've had, just as we've had predatory lending, we've had predatory institutions as well. And one thing I would like for listeners to know, if you're sending your kids to school, obviously state schools are a great bargain, but there are a lot of schools that are these wealthy schools that Fred mentioned, where, everyone who makes less than a certain amount of money is getting a full ride or getting zero debt. And, it's like Princeton and Duke and Stanford and W&L does it. And, I counsel a lot of people who just assume that whatever state institution that's going to require them to take out 40% of the costs is going to be better. And they're in the GPA and testing range to get into these schools where they can go for free. And it truly makes a difference. Now, Fenaba, your work on student loans and families is very interesting to me because it kind of touches on some of the predatory stuff that we've discussed earlier. But I would like for you to tell us a little bit more about how the burden of student loan debt has impacted quality of relationships and development of new families, and what that means for our culture.
Yeah, so I think, it's interesting because I think when I first started this work, it was, I was kind of finding that and what I kind of was, calling or kind of categorizing as resources that take or products that took resources out of the household were negatively related with relationship quality measures, and that's kind of what we were seeing when we looked at like couples and who had had to joint credit cards and those kinds of these kind of products that were just kind of not building wealth together, not building resources in the household together. But it's been interesting to kind of continue to be in this area over time, especially with regard to the student debt discussions, because I did kind of argue in some of my earlier papers that it was a deterrent, but now to kind of long-term relationships. But having spoke with and done some interviews with couples and people who have now kind of come of age in this debt crisis, I would say that we probably would find it a little bit weakened, those kinds of relationships, or those things that I found, because it has become so ubiquitous to have debt. And like we discussed, the idea of it being good debt versus bad debt. I think these are discussions that people are openly, probably didn't have before, but now are having within their homes and their households. And so, you have debt, I have debt too, so what are we going to do together, right? And then they start to have these conversations about, working, if this is somebody that you want to, let's just say, build your life with, or potentially, build a family with, what is the debt going to mean for us planning, rather than not necessarily ending the relationship or not building a household together, but how does the debt going to, and they incorporate the debt into their planning portfolios in a sense. So that's been kind of interesting to watch. I think, again, we have to do probably more research around this, but I think the discussions that were probably ones that were wrought or not had are probably have grown and then incorporated into discussions of family planning and future planning. to an extent that it probably, and especially I would say within the younger generations. And I've actually picked this up quite a bit with my students. I've been teaching it for that long, but I've been teaching long enough that I, ask them questions around, do you know how much debt you're having, or how much, you've taken out, and, in the span of 10, 15 years, there's really been a difference in my observations of how knowledgeable they are about what they're carrying or how much they are taking on. And I think has largely been a result of the nature of the discussion becoming more common and more popular. That's not the word I want to use, but you understand what I'm saying, to a certain extent. So I think it's a question. I think it still is a factor, but I think it may have changed a little bit in its orientation of how it is impacting or affecting relationship growth over time, especially for young adults, for younger generations.
Yeah, I would say what I see in my students is who are, they're all graduate students. I see discussions of we're not having kids until. Right. And that seems to be the difference. And, I can even see, I've been teaching since 2015, and I can see, I can kind of gauge wealth by who had kids first, if they didn't come into law school with children already. And it's, I'm not an empiricist and I don't do the data, but just looking at it, it's like, I know I can tell which of my students had no student loans. And they tended to have children first already. And so, some of my students have 5-year-olds, and some of my students are just having their kids, at 30 or more. And it's because they are having that conversation about debt that I don't think we had when we graduated. I would say when I was in school, I kind of thought I must be the only one who hasn't paid off their loans. That's what I thought when I was working, right? It was like, everyone else clearly has paid off their loans, or everyone else clearly has it more together, didn't borrow as much as I did. And so it was revolutionary for me to be like, oh, wait, we're all still paying our loans? Because we just didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about how much we were borrowing in the 90s. We didn't talk about, how long it was going to take, or that 6 figures of income didn't mean that you could pay off, 6 figures of debt quickly. And it was just hard to make that calculation as an 18-year-old. And I think we now have given people more knowledge. Now, I do have one more follow-up for y'all before we get into future predictions. There seems to be a current trend towards encouraging low-income students to plan within their means. So we're seeing more of go to trade school, or do community college first because it's free, or skip the private schools. Do you think that's a better plan? Is that the right thing to tell the younger people, to just skip out on student loans altogether and educate yourself within your means?
Okay. There's a problematic part and there's a practical part. The problematic part is that you're basically telling a group of students that you can't have what other people have, even if you have the capacity to perform well. So that's the problematic part. The practical part, however, is making sure that we are not sending them into the lion's den, and that's a policy problem. So I wish that we did with student loans what we do with home loans. So when I went to buy my house, and they said you're gonna get a loan of this house, but somebody's gonna do an appraisal, and if the neighborhood's not right, if the property is structurally unsound, you can't take out that much money. You can only take out as much as what it's worth, as far as the market is concerned. And we didn't want to do that for education. And it's okay if you don't want to do it for education, but then you got to pay for it and not put it on the back of these individual students and their families. And so part of it is, it just seems unfair that you lure them into the system and you tell them that the system's fair, and you tell them that the lender is honest. And then the lender doesn't do due diligence, and they're like, oh, if you go to a school, you're not getting the return on investment, and you end up with all this debt that you can't repay. Bad on you, but you can't easily discharge it, and we're going to hunt you for the rest of your life. So that's my problem with the whole thing about telling students, you have a limited set of options, instead of telling the lenders and our government, you have to be responsible, and you can't sort of put a whole bunch of debt on people when you know they're not going to be able to pay it back. And we need to also be realistic about sort of Pell Grant is like half of what it used to be worth, and we're not investing in our public institutions. You fix that, and you like largely fix the problem, but you also need to like cancel a bunch of debt that people can't repay. And so that's where I land on this, is that they need to be sort of given the warning of, you don't go into the lion's den, but then we need to make sure the lion's den gets shut down. So that's where I come out on this.
I love the idea of appraisal of institutions, because we know, I won't name any of them, but they kind of prey on the students who can't move away to school and need to be able to attend school while working full time. And so it's like, oh, you can get online and go to school at night and do it from the comfort of your home. It's just going to cost you as much as going to Princeton to go to this school that is from your house. And there's no warning, and they just fill out the forms like everyone else and get all the money that they need, and often don't finish, and often have the debt load. And so there's, there are predatory institutions just like there are predatory lenders. And yeah.
Okay, can I put a point on this one? The other thing we don't see is those schools will call those prospective students every day, and until they get them to sign on the line. And they'll when they call, they're nice, and they're persuasive, and they're paid to be persuasive. They are hounding them every day to get them to sign. And so you have this person like, oh no, I'm finally investing in my future because someone convinced them of that, and they did it every day. And then that person who convinced them to come in disappears. Like it's sort of the shadow agent. So that's the other thing, is that we are also acting as if this person is like just looking at a whole bunch of objective information, and that there's not sort of an entire team of people whose job it is to get them to sign, and who will hound them in ways that are persuasive until they sign. And so that's the other part that I think is just, I want to say criminal, but I think that it means a different thing for the lawyers than it does for the sociologists, but I think it's criminal.
I would say unconscionable.
Okay.
That's the compromise. It's like,
yes.
it's our step down from going all the way to crime, right? But it's not fair, right? It's taking advantage of someone who just doesn't know any better.
Can I also say that, to that question, and it speaks to Fred's first point, is that usually, I think a lot when we hear those kind of arguments, or, all thinking about alternative pathways, and, I kind of like to flippantly flip the script and say, well, would you send your child, or, people who are kind of putting forth these kinds of narratives, and instead of correcting the system so that it can be inclusive and in ways that allow for people who are financially strapped, or, financially don't have the resources, instead you're going to create an alternative path, and, separate is not always equal, to kind of go down that road. So it just makes me always kind of question the messenger around some of those, because I always want to ask, well, where did you send your child? How were you able to make it so that would you send your child to, and I by no means am I saying that those alternative paths are less than. It's just, you have to be wary and questioning the motives of the individual for whom they are putting forth this option, rather than being reflective and thinking about the situation that created this scenario to happen.
Yeah, and they will actually say, if you give them time, everybody doesn't need to go to college. Everybody shouldn't be here. Everybody who's here shouldn't be here. And I'm just like, so who is it who's here who shouldn't be here?
Who should be here.
And who should be here?
Absolutely.
And then they get quiet. But
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, you know, it's a dog whistle to me when people say that, when it's like those people should go to trade school, those people should go to community college. And I think we all know what the dog whistle is, right? We know what they're signaling when they say that. It's not a viable solution. So for our last few minutes, I'd love to speculate about what the future could hold. And so I'd like to have each of you just say, you know, what do you think the solution is? Like, what would it take to obtain more equitable income and access to credit? And, you know, I always say, this is my if you could wave a magic wand segment. Like nothing is too pie in the sky, and it's truly your opinion moment. So Fenaba, let's start with you. What do you think it would take to fix this?
I was thinking about this. It's hard. It's hard. It's honestly a hard question. And for someone who's like sits and thinks about these things all the time, I was just like, I don't know what I would say. But you know, I will give an answer that I probably, you know, for today. I don't know. It may change if you ask me tomorrow. what my response to this might be. But I think, you know, thinking about you know, kind of like basic things like raising minimum wage and allowing, you know, thinking about workers' rights, kind of some of the stuff that we see happening with social movements, you know, where people are kind of focused right now, thinking about those kinds of like allowing people to unionize and, you know, really thinking about how rights have shifted over time and who has access to power through money and resources is what I would kind of answer today. I was also thinking a bit about like institutions that have been created to kind of help consumers, such as the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Like if they are allowed to actually fulfill their mission and not be thwarted or not, you know, be, you know, we could really address and you know and do more to kind of help consumers out. So that's what's come to mind today.
Well, I'll say the benefit of being an academic is you get to change your mind.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm going to be writing a long time. I can write this and then write the next paper that challenges what I just said, right?
There we go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the reason we can change our mind is because we are open to evidence. And so part of what we do is we say, given what we see today and as best as we can assess it, this is what looks like the best solution. When we get new evidence that says some of your assumptions were wrong, something's not actually going the way you think it's going, we pivot. And so, because we don't have to hang on, you know, it's not like, you know, I've gone to Sunday school and you know, the word is the word. We have to be able to pivot based on evidence. And so I think one of the things that we know for sure, and you know, part of this is looking at work that Fenaba has done, is that the student loan crisis has widened the racial wealth gap. And so how do you fix that? You have to cancel some of that debt. It's a math problem. So if you've got this loan that's disproportionately impacting Black and brown borrowers, and it's widening the wealth gap, even as people are getting higher education, you just have to cancel the loan. You just have to cancel a bunch of that debt. And we know that canceling up to 50K, and if you do at least 30K, it has a huge impact on those disparities. And then you've got to say, you know what, we're going to support students to kind of go into college by, you know, at least doubling the Pell Grant. And we're going to make sure that when you enter adulthood, you've got some kind of seed capital, and the idea of the baby bond. So there are a couple of like and then we're going to really strengthen, and the last thing is strengthen our consumer protections so that you're not being able to be like roughshod, treated with disrespect, and put into a lifetime of debt peonage. So that's where I come out on it.
We only have a couple minutes, but I'd love to get a hot take from both of you. Do you have an idea of a number for student loan debt cancellation, or do you think it just should be blanket across the board? Fenaba, what do you think? Do you have a number?
I think we can do it all. But yeah, but you know, if we want to help Black borrowers, it needs to be more than 10, and definitely closer to 50, like Fred said.
And so if you do 50, you zero out 95% of distressed borrowers, and we just ran this analysis. Charlie Eaton led the analysis of this, and if you do 30, you zero out 40% of borrowers who owe more after 12 years, 46%, almost half of them if you at least do 30,000. And if you do 50,000, you zero out 67% of borrowers who owe more after 12 years. And so the numbers are there, but we have to go big. That I hate to call it that little 10,000. It's nice and everything, but it won't do what you need it to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining me. This has been an enlightening conversation, and I always love talking to both of you. So thank you for appearing. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Getting Common. If you ever miss an episode, you can catch rebroadcast where podcasts are played and on the Voice America Network and our YouTube channel. Feel free to email me through the show page, or you can reach me on social media at Carliss C on all platforms. Thank you both again for this conversation. I truly, truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Carliss.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All